Hi theory students. Today we're going to do the second part of our chapter on seventh chords. We'll be talking about seventh chords in keys, where they fall in major and minor keys, and we'll also be talking about how to notate these with lead sheet or commercial chord symbols. For the seventh chord in keys, just as we can create triads based on each scale degree in a key, we can also create seventh chords in major keys or in minor keys, both from the natural minor form and from the harmonic minor form. This chart here shows you what they are all like in each of these forms of major or minor. Let me show you on the staff how this works. In a major key, note that I wrote the triads just as I wrote them before on all of the scale degrees in a major key, and then I added an extra third on top. How did I know which one to add? I added the note that belonged to the key signature. So I added B natural, C natural, D natural, etc. If the key signature had a B flat in it, then there would be a flat on that. Okay, so here we are for the one chord, a major triad, a major seventh from C up to B. So the major seventh chord, we call that a major seventh. In minor triad, minor seventh on the 2, minor triad, minor seventh on the 3. You can go back and review that chart that I gave, but also remember that I can write them this way. And if you're wondering what seventh does this imply here, it implies the one that the key gives us. Likewise there and there. So we go all the way through. What we notice is that there's an unusual one here, the one on scale degree 5, with a major triad and a minor seventh. We sometimes call that a dominant seventh type chord because it's only found in the major key around the dominant, scale degree 5. The other odd one is on scale degree 7, where we've got a diminished triad, B, D, F, but a minor seventh, B up to A. That was our half diminished seventh chord, diminished triad, minor seventh. In minor, and I did this in C minor, it's really the same pattern as the major ones. Imagine if the major ones started here and went major seventh, minor, minor, major seventh, dominant seventh type chord. I didn't write dominant seventh here because this is actually scale degree 7. Minor seventh, and then half diminished seventh. So this is from the natural minor, and it's no surprise that it follows the same pattern as the major. After all, a diatonic scale is a diatonic scale, except imagine that we're starting from a different frame of reference. If this were E flat major, that would be a 1, that would be a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, and a 7. So it just uses the same types of seventh chords but rotated a few slots over. In harmonic minor, those are the chords with scale degree 7. So if I'm doing this in harmonic minor, I'm going to be changing that one, and that one, and that one. Instead, I would get an augmented triad and a major seventh, and for that reason we don't really see that one. We don't use that one in harmonic minor. But what about the 5 chord? Major triad, G, B, D, minor seventh, G to F. That's just like the one we got in C major, so that would be a dominant seventh type chord. And what about this one? B, D, F, diminished triad, B up to A flat, not A, diminished seventh. So this one would be our diminished seventh, sometimes written that way. And that's what I've indicated here on this chart for each of the seventh chords. Learn these patterns because they will come up in every major and minor key that we work with. How do we represent these with lead sheet or commercial chord symbols? Remember, when we just had triads, all of the roots are uppercase letters. So chords are major unless they're labeled otherwise. So F sharp minor, uppercase F sharp, and then put minor after it, or just the letter M is one abbreviation. D means a D major chord. F diminished, E flat augmented. Those are ways to represent triads. For the seventh, the default is that it's a minor seventh above the root. Thus, when we write G7, what we mean is major triad. That's what the G indicates without the triad being modified. The 7 means a minor seventh above the G. So that would be F natural. That would be a major triad and a minor seventh. In other words, a dominant seventh type chord. Since the dominant seventh chords are the most common seventh chords, that's why we've made that the default. We see that as often as any. Here are some variants. When we say major seventh after a root name, that means to add a major seventh above the root. So if we wrote B major seventh, that's a major seventh chord. B, D sharp, F sharp is the major triad. B, A sharp is the major seventh. Minor seventh means a minor triad and a minor seventh. So G sharp minor seventh is a minor seventh chord. G sharp, B, D sharp is the triad. G sharp to F sharp is the seventh, the minor seventh. If we write diminished seventh, then we mean to add a diminished seventh above the root as well as having a diminished triad. So when we write a diminished seventh, both the triad and the seventh is diminished, or a fully diminished seventh chord. A, C, E flat is the diminished triad. A to G flat is the diminished seventh. Or in other words, we start on the root A, we go up in minor thirds. A to C, C to E flat to G flat. And the symbol of the small degree sign and the seventh is used by some lead sheet publishers. What about half diminished seventh chords? This is a little odd. A lot of publishers don't use that symbol for half diminished seventh. Maybe they feel that not enough readers understand what that is, or maybe they feel that it's too hard in small print to distinguish between that and that. So here's how it's usually written in commercial chord symbols. It's usually written as an E minor seventh with flat fifth, or lowered fifth, which means take an E minor chord. So if the E minor chord were E, G, B, lower the fifth, B becomes B flat, and add a minor seventh, D. That's our half diminished seventh chord. Diminished triad, minor seventh. The symbol for it is kind of unwieldy, but that's what we're working with. One of the variants, by the way, I wrote flat 5 here. What if you're in a sharp key? This still means don't put a flat in front of it, but it means lower it. Sometimes they will put a minus sign if they want you to lower the fifth of the chord. Sometimes they'll put a plus sign if they want you to raise, in this case, raise the seventh of the chord. So in commercial chord symbols or lead sheet symbols, the minus or the plus have to do with raising or lowering a part of the chord. So finally, here are some examples. Let's look at what the commercial chord symbols would be. The root here is F. The root here is G. The root here is D sharp. I wrote those in uppercase letters. The root here is E. Now, in the first example, it's an F minor triad and a minor seventh. So I write it that way. In the second example, it's a major triad, so I don't need to modify the G. It's a minor seventh, so I just put a 7 there and we're done. In the third example, D sharp, F sharp, A is a diminished triad. D sharp to C natural is a diminished seventh. I can either write it that way or that way. In this case, with a diminished triad, now the 7 that we wrote means diminished seventh. In the last case, we've got a diminished triad and a minor seventh. That's our half diminished seventh chord. But we have to write it this way. E minor seventh, flat 5 or lowered fifth. So learn these commercial chord symbols as well as the Roman numeral way of doing things. That's all for today.